Welcome everybody to this first SPOC webinar, Let's Talk Palm Oil, Meet the Experts. For this first webinar, we have Jan Maarten Dros of Solidaridad. Welcome, Jan Maarten. Jan Maarten, hi, thank you for being here. Jan Maarten is a colleague of mine working at Solidaridad. He has extensive experience working on tropical deforestation, and he has visited all major palm oil and soy producing countries, and he's been involved in the sector since 2003. This webinar is hosted by the Sustainable Palm Oil Choice Initiative, an initiative to stimulate the creation of sustainable palm oil value chains and promote an open dialogue about palm oil and palm oil consumption in Europe. The operating is done by Solidaridad, one of the partners of the SPOC initiative. My name is Marieke Leegwater. I started working in the palm sector in 2002, first within the industry. It was the time when the discussions around palm oil and the rainforest started. When I started as a legal expert, my work later on became more and more about sustainability. In 2012, I joined Solidaridad to further work on sustainable palm oil value chains. At Solidaridad, I was allowed quite some time in the field with both producers, but also at company sites. And it's there that I got to really understand that palm oil itself is not the problem, but rather the way it is produced sometimes. I am honored and delighted to lead this webinar series, and today to start with the first one, I'm also very delighted that we are here with 95 people. I see more and more anti-palm communication in Europe, and I am worried about this because I see that it's not helping us to solve the issues. So with these webinars, I hope I will contribute to develop and deepen the understanding about the issues, and also with that bring solutions closer. As we have about 100 registrations, we ask you all to mute, or we mute you, but you can type your questions in the type box, and my colleague Owen will pick them up and give them to me. And for now, I will start with 5 questions to Jan Maarten, and then I will take questions from the floor. And I saw a question already whether there will be an evaluation form, and I think that's a very good idea. So we will, if my colleagues can support me with that, also send around an evaluation form. So with that introduction, I suggest we dig right in. Jan Maarten, can you tell me, is palm oil destroying the rainforests in your perspective? Jan Maarten, you're muted.
That's a classic.
Thanks.
Is palm oil destroying the rainforest? No, to destroy the rainforest, you actually need bulldozers and chainsaws. So it's not the palm oil or the oil palm plant itself that is destroying the rainforest. But of course, rainforest is clear to make way for agriculture. And one of the fastest growing crops in the world currently is palm oil. So there definitely is a relation, but I don't think it's as simplistic that by stopping producing palm oil, we can stop deforestation. And that's, I think, exactly what this webinar is going to be about.
Yeah, thanks for that. I realize I kind of put you on the spot with that first question. If you like, maybe you can tell me a little bit more about you and your experience first.
Yeah, so this is me almost 30 years ago. When I was doing my master's thesis in the Philippines, the national government had just issued a logging ban that was in effect for about 2 years when this picture was taken. So as you can see, it wasn't really effective. And ever since that time, I have been thinking about how we can mobilize consumers, markets, and governments in order to stop the unsustainable use of natural resources. After doing research work in the Philippines, I moved to Brazil to be part of a large zoning exercise and seeing that a lot of Amazon deforestation was happening because of soybean and cattle ranching, but also land speculation. And after my time in Brazil, I joined Aid Environment. Aid Environment is a small nonprofit consultancy in the Netherlands, and we worked for Greenpeace and Friends of the Earth to actually show that deforestation is not caused by logging, or not primarily caused by tropical hardwoods, which was then, we're talking late 1990s, the main kind of villain in the space. But actually that plantation agriculture is a much bigger driver for deforestation. Now that message stuck because we are still talking about soy and palm oil destroying the rainforest, but a lot has happened since. About 12 years ago, I joined Solidaridad to set up a program on the sustainable development using palm oil, soy, and sugarcane and other commodity crops. I became the leader of the palm oil program. I handed that over to Marike about 4 or 5 years ago. And ever since, I've been looking at the issue of climate change in relation to agriculture and deforestation. So that's my history in a nutshell, Marike.
Thanks for that. Very impressive. Yeah, I'm honored to have you as guest and colleague. Maybe we can now go a bit deeper. You say, you need chainsaws to bulldoze the rainforest, but why is the world blaming palm oil for deforestation?
Well, so let's first take a look at a number of statistics, and this is mostly the World Resource Institute, about basically deforestation, about palm oil, and how the two relate. These are the latest WRI figures on deforestation. The top 10 countries where primary forest, and this is both rainforest and dry types of forest, have been cleared. So Brazil tops the charts with way over 1 million hectares of primary forest loss. Then second is DR Congo in Central Africa. And then we see Indonesia, Malaysia, and a number of Latin American countries following suit. And of these top 10, it's Indonesia, Malaysia, and Colombia, so numbers 3, 6, and 7, that are major palm oil exporters to Europe and other regions. On the next slide, you can see what is the agricultural suitability of palm oil. So this is basically the palm oil belt. You see that it is located along the equator, and especially in wet tropical habitats. So palm oil does well in places where tropical rainforest grows. And in order to grow more palm oil, you need habitat which is originally with tropical rainforest. Then if we go to the next slide, let's take a closer look at what's happening in terms of deforestation in Indonesia. Number 1 and number 2 were Brazil and DRC, but neither of them exports palm oil in major quantities. So let's have a look at country number 3 on the list. What you see actually is that up till very recently, deforestation was increasing year over year. So what we see is the annual loss. So every year, more primary forest was cut in Indonesia up to 2016. And then it kind of went down by 60 to 70%. And I think if we drill down this question on, is there a relation between deforestation and palm oil? Indonesia, being the 3rd largest country in terms of deforestation, historically a champion. If we look at 2016, it was number 1 on the charts, and the biggest producer and exporter of palm oil. Indonesia is the country to go to. Now, let's break down this primary forest loss in the different drivers of deforestation. Owen, can you show the next slide? Yes. Okay, so this is a bit of a bubblegum chart, but it's hard to get these data broken down by driver of deforestation.
Yeah, Maarten, what's the bubblegum slide?
Well, it has so many colors.
Ah, thanks.
that it could be confusing. I think the legend is readable. The numbers to the left may be hard to read for some, but it's basically about orders of magnitude. The dark brown line, so the one that peaks in 2009, I don't think we can see the years at the bottom very well. At least I can't. But this graph goes from, say, 2000 to the left to 2016, which was peak deforestation in Indonesia to the right. And in the middle part, so between 2006 and 2011, the brown line tops all. And the brown line is deforestation for palm oil plantations, large-scale palm oil plantations. They're easy to detect by satellite, so this has been monitored very thoroughly. And this is also the time, 2004 to 2009-10, when all these campaigns were running to stop deforestation for palm oil. And they were effective, because what we see from 2009 onward is that actually the deforestation for large palm oil estates has gone down significantly, more than can be justified by just prices of palm oil, because they were actually very high in that period. Unfortunately, other drivers of deforestation have taken over. The yellow line is forest fires, which were particularly heavy in 2016, 2015 and 16. But the blue line is smallholder agriculture, and they have also become a greater driver of deforestation in recent years.
Wow. Let me ask two questions at this moment, Jan Maarten. Who's actually gathering this data? Where does it come from?
So this is data from satellite imagery that is available freely to scientific institutions. And this was a research study that was published, I think, in 2018, based on data up to 2016. Remember, in the previous slide, we saw deforestation in Indonesia went down sharply after 2016. But these trends are uncontested. Everybody agrees that the large-scale deforestation for palm oil has gone down after the RSPO standard came into effect, after the big trading companies issued their no deforestation policies. But instead, we see other drivers of deforestation explode in the case of fires. And 2015-16 was an extraordinary year in terms of fires, but because of climate change and because forests are getting increasingly fragmented, I don't expect forest fires or smallholders to go down very much.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that you bring that up, because looking at the slide, do I now understand correctly then that in principle smallholders are responsible for deforestation in Indonesia?
Yeah, looking at these numbers, smallholders have become the second largest driver of deforestation after forest fires. And palm oil is one of the more interesting crops for smallholders to grow. Although recent price collapses have maybe reduced the profit or the benefit that smallholders get from palm oil.
So why are all these smallholders now deforesting?
Well, I think the basic reason is that they need money, they need food, they need to feed their families. But they also increasingly need cash to put their kids in school, to buy a television set or a motorcycle. It's basically human development. On top of that, I just showed this tropical belt where palm oil is growing. In a rainforest climate, the traditional way of agriculture is slash and burn. The nutrients that feed any crops, whether it's rice or bananas or oil palm, they are stored much more in the vegetation than in the soil. So if you want to do agriculture in a tropical rainforest without fertilizers and without all kinds of technology, the traditional way of farming is to clear a piece of forest, burn it, use the ash as a fertilizer, grow a crop for 2 or 3 years, and then leave it as fallow. And then because of the rain and the natural soil fertility, the forest will regenerate. And if the population density is low, it can be perfectly sustainable. 1 or 2% of the forest is small scale farms, and the rest surrounding it is a mixture of virgin forest and secondary forest that regenerates into a rainforest.
Yeah, but I think at this moment in time, we are also in a global biodiversity and climate crisis. So I understand smallholders want to deforest, but I'm also very worried about these developments.
Well, let me put one thing straight. They don't want to deforest. Deforestation, if you're a smallholder, is dirty, is dangerous, and nobody wants to live in a landscape that is completely covered by agricultural or plantation crops. The people that live inside or near the forest, they know they rely on the forest for timber, for hunting, for climate regulation. So there needs to be a balance between agriculture and forest in any tropical landscape. The problem is that everybody has to decide for himself or herself what he or she is going to do with the 3 or 4 or 5 hectares they have. So the individual decision would be to convert forests or rubber plantations to palm oil or food crops, whereas collectively, the best option would be to intensify the land use in the land that's already cleared, come up with more sustainable forestry and food systems, and stopping the clearing of forest, because if the fallow period, if the regeneration is not long enough, the entire ecosystem will degrade. And this is what's happening at significant scale in Indonesia, in Congo, and in the Amazon.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. I see we have quite some interesting audience questions coming in. I want to pick at least one of them. Where do you see the impact, positive or negative, of palm oil in Sustainable Development Goals?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think overall, palm oil is a very interesting smallholder crop to lift farmers out of poverty. We've seen, for example, in Malaysia, that government programs and World Bank programs that have allocated 4 hectares of land, which is small given the low natural fertility of the soils in Malaysia. So 4 hectares of land would lift a family out of poverty within 1 generation. The parents earn enough money to send kids to school, to send them to university, and they can have a livelihood away from farming. However, if the land reform kind of setups are smaller, then the risk is that if commodity prices go down, the farmers don't earn enough to pay back any debts that they have made when planting the palm oil. So in general, it's a good crop, but there's always a risk of monoculture and relying on global markets that would reduce the resilience of the farmers. But in general terms, because palm oil is in high demand and the demand for it has been doubling every decade in the last 40 years, it's a safe bet for smallholders to plant at least part of the land with palm oil.
Thanks. I realize it's quite challenging to listen to you and answer the questions, try to grab the questions. So we're going to take another one now. In the graph, there are separate lines for smallholders and oil palm plantation contributing to deforestation. So as palm oil is a crop also farmed by smallholders, how do these 2 lines relate to each other? Which crops are mainly contributing to deforestation, if not palm oil? So which other crops are grown?
Yeah, so there's in this graph, timber plantations are a separate line. It's the kind of light brown line that you see peaking towards 2010, 11, 12. And that's mostly pulpwood. So that's for paper production. And it's interesting to see that after the expansion for palm oil is going down, there is a peak for plantation development for paper. And there's another large-scale plantation line, which is a kind of greenish brown, which is also peaking in 2012 when there was a peak in general commodity prices. I think that line is mostly rubber, but it could also be other plantation crops, because this graph is just for Indonesia. Remember, it's not a global graph. Then for smallholders, I have not found reliable statistics on how smallholder agriculture globally or for Indonesia is composed from different crops. But I know from experience that in the past 2 decades, palm oil has always been part of the mix of most smallholders in Sumatra and Kalimantan, especially because rubber prices have been very low in the past 10 years. Yeah. So I think a significant portion of that blue line for Indonesia is palm oil. And other plantation crops have gained more importance as a driver of deforestation compared to palm oil.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. Maybe, I just want to go quickly back to the issue, like now these smallholders are deforesting, and let's say at the same time we are in this global biodiversity crisis. What do you think? Are there any Solidaridad activities or programs addressing to that? Or, Jan Maarten, you're muted, I think.
Looking at the numbers that I just presented, I think we can conclude, although there is no solid scientific evidence yet, that the onset of RSPO has reduced the deforestation for large-scale palm oil plantations, but it's not stopping deforestation by smallholders, whether that's for palm oil or another crop. And smallholders usually first plant a food crop, rice, then followed by bananas, until whatever tree crop they have, whether it's rubber or palm oil, is mature and is producing. So they don't deforest for palm oil, they deforest to make a living, to get an agricultural livelihood. And because there are controls now on palm oil, but there are no controls either over smallholders or over other estate crops, we need to adopt a landscape approach. And Solidaridad has adopted a landscape approach. We have to talk land governance much more than certifying commodities. Because imagine we certify all the palm oil in the world. There would still be deforestation for cattle. There would still be deforestation for pulp and paper. And there would still be smallholders that nobody will actually shoot down because they clear a small piece of forest in order to feed their family. So we need a more holistic approach. And some call it jurisdictional approach, some call it landscape approach, but it's about being inclusive and basically providing a sustainability doctor to smallholders, but also to companies and governments, rather than a sustainability police, which is basically what certification comes down to, controlling whether people play by the rules. But there's only a few people that are actually part of that rule system, which currently is RSPO, but the same counts for other certification programs like Fair Trade or the Malaysian Sustainable Palm Oil Standard.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. So can you elaborate also a little bit more? What does that mean for the European use of palm oil and consumption of palm oil here? How can we do a better job?
I think the movement to promote the use of sustainable palm oil and the fact that has been quite successful with, I think, most West European countries now hitting targets of 70, 80, 85% certified sustainable imports does help a great deal. And it may seem like a bit of a contradiction that on one end I'm saying certification is not doing the job on the ground, but then Europe should continue buying certified material. Why is that? Because there's a handful of traders, I think the 5 biggest traders in palm oil, they trade about 80% of the globally traded volume. And they have committed to no deforestation policies. And they have done that because of pressure from consumers and NGOs and citizens. If we stop buying palm oil because we think palm oil is causing deforestation, the pressure on these traders to stick to these commitments on zero deforestation and continue to monitor and continue to engage locally to cut deforestation from their supply chain, that stimulus will disappear. Because Europe is not asking for palm oil anymore. We will import soybean oil or coconut oil or get sunflower oil from Ukraine. But in that way, we will lose leverage on processes of land governance where the traders, the palm oil traders, have now become our allies. So it's very important to keep demanding a deforestation-free, exploitation-free, sustainable product from the palm oil sector, because together with the palm oil traders, we can make the difference locally in places like Indonesia or Africa or Central America.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. That's really useful to understand, and also interesting to hear you explain how the things relate and why it's still important to buy certified volume. While we're on the topic of demand, I want to take another question from the audience. What do you think about biodiesel and food security?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there's different angles to that, but there is non-edible derivatives from palm oil, like palm oil fatty acid distillate, that is, say, a byproduct or a residue from the refining process of palm oil. For me, it's perfectly fine to use that for biodiesel as long as it's originated in a sustainable way. So if it is derived from palm oil that is certified or coming from old, well-established plantation, nothing wrong with that. The problem is if we start using crude palm oil, which is an ingredient for food and other high-end uses as an energy carrier. Because if Europe, for example, starts to subsidize biofuels because of its climate policy, but in that way doubles the European consumption of palm oil, and this is what actually happened a couple of years ago. European imports went up, or European consumption went up from, I think, about 3 million to about 6 million tons per year, all of a sudden. It creates upward pressure for prices for palm oil. There's more demand, and that may trigger deforestation, because some people in the market are not asking for certified material. They're not asking for the safeguards that the European Union asks for. And then either prices go up with the same supply, which causes food prices to increase, so it's bad for food security. That's, I think, one angle of the answer. The other angle is that because prices go up, it becomes more interesting to expand palm oil, also at the expense of forest, because not 100% of palm oil is certified yet. So biofuel indirectly, if it's made from crude palm oil, so the food oil, it will either increase prices on the food market, or it will increase deforestation, or both.
So in summary, I think you say your advice would be to phase out the use of palm oil for biofuels, at least in Europe.
Well, definitely subsidized biofuel, because if we subsidize palm oil, biofuel, to decrease the emissions in Europe, we will increase either food prices, which is not in line with the Sustainable Development Goals, or increase the emissions of producer countries like Colombia or Indonesia. So we have to look at it holistically. I think Colombia and Indonesia should have, I mean, they are sovereign countries. If they don't have petroleum, they should be free to opt in for palm oil, but please with sustainability safeguards, because the emissions of clearing tropical rainforest or draining tropical peat swamps are orders of magnitude bigger than the savings of using biodiesel instead of fossil petroleum.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. Yeah, I see questions from the audience coming in. I really love that. I guess it means that there's a lot of talk about. I also see that we are still on 120 participants, which is also great to see. So I'll continue taking the questions from the audience as of now, and let's see how far we get. First, to what requirements must RSPO certified palm oil producers minimally adhere to in terms of practical site design? So I think this is meant to go about what does an RSPO certified plantation operator need to do before it creates a plantation?
Okay, this goes a bit into like technical details of plantation setup. I think in future episodes of this webinar, there will be people from RSPO or from conservation NGOs that know more detailed about this. But I think basically there's two principles that stand out and that should be respected and that are well documented so you can easily follow them. One is high conservation value areas. Whenever you develop a plantation, you should be mapping the conservation values, and that's not just orangutans or species, but it also is fragile areas, the areas along rivers, hilltops and slopes, etc. Map them well, and make sure that whenever you establish your plantation, you avoid or you actually restore these areas if they have been degraded by previous land users. And also show the investment you make in planting some of the area with all palms, but restoring the rest that is not highly suitable for your palms. Obviously, there is a new planting procedure under RSPO that provides very strict guidance on how to deal with forests. And then you have to check whether the policies of your off-takers, the refiners downstream of your CPO mill, actually allow you to expand in residual forest or secondary forest. These are not, I think, covered under the RSPO guidelines, but they may very well apply because a regenerating forest actually sequesters a lot of carbon. So there's a lot of things that I would advise you to look into, both from the market side and from the regulation side, prior to actually starting to set up your nursery. Then there is the social aspect to it. Whenever you expand or whenever you get a concession from the government to set up a plantation, you should also be very aware that the rights of local communities are guaranteed, that they get fair options for employment, but also to continue their current livelihoods as they have them. Because most countries where we currently see expansion of palm oil, whether you talk West Africa or Central America, Papua, or indeed Indonesia itself, has separate legal systems for, say, public law and common law, local law. It's called adat in Indonesia. So even though your concession was granted under the official national legislation, you should always be aware of the rights of local land users, which are handled in a different system. And for Indonesia and for West Africa, this is actually quite well formulated, ratified. So consult experts on local customary law way before you start making your investment plans. That would be my advice.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. Yeah, and I would advise questions about RSPO and RSPO principles and criteria. It can really well be found in the online about RSPO. I saw quite some questions relating to the graph about the deforestation causes. And maybe you can bring it back on. One of the questions is, let's say, in particular around the yellow line, the mustard yellow line that's going up. In the graph, it says grassland and shrubland.
Ah, yes.
So
yes.
What is the main driver around that one? Can you say a little bit more? And is it not related to palm oil expansion? How do we know?
This is actually forest fires. But yeah, so I should have actually I glossed over it when I discussed this this slide. Basically, what is yellow and what you see go up very sharply in 2015 is the impact of the large-scale fires that struck Indonesia and I think all of the world in 2015. And after the fire has ended, the vegetation that you find in these kind of burn scars is low grassy and bush vegetation. So if in the year after the deforestation event, no crop has been planted, either smallholder or plantation, it has been classified here as grassland, shrubland as the, say, follow-up vegetation. But the fact that there is grassland or shrubland there and not a economic crop is due to the fact that these were like unplanned forest fires. So some of this land is likely to be planted with either a smallholder crop or a plantation crop in the future. But the huge peak of these events, both after 2013 and 2015, is because of the incidence of forest fires.
Thank you. I hope this answers the question. Another one, in the graph, you could see that deforestation due to oil palm went down, fortunately. How about the situation in South America, where still many farmers change to palm oil currently, and do mechanisms such as RSPO make a difference there?
Owen, if we go back a couple of slides. Yes, this one. So what you see here is that Peru, Colombia, and to some extent Mexico, these are countries where palm oil is expanding, and some Central American countries, which are so small that they fall out of this chart, like Nicaragua and Honduras, also see palm oil expansion. But it's at least an order of magnitude smaller than in Indonesia. So it is a concern, but a relatively small portion of this total deforestation of about, I think, 2 million hectares a year all over Latin America is due to palm oil. What I think is promising is that many Latin American countries, including Honduras, Colombia, and Peru, have made commitments for zero deforestation in palm oil. And cattle ranching is still by far the largest driver of deforestation in most Latin American countries, including Brazil and Colombia. But a zero deforestation commitment is no guarantee that actually this is not happening. So it requires careful monitoring, and let's not repeat the same kind of process that we saw in Indonesia, where first deforestation had to be really rampant for palm oil before it's checked. But let's check this development before it becomes a problem of deforestation of hundreds of thousands of hectares per year.
Do you have any recommendations for European audience? I know, imports of palm oil in Europe are gradually, slowly moving away from Asia to Latin America. So I don't know if you see any.
Well, in either
potential.
case, yeah, in either case, where we see that deforestation directly related to palm oil is decreasing, but deforestation is actually going up every year. Supply chain actors need to think beyond their footprint. They need to think beyond what they are responsible for in terms of sourcing. And that means that this landscape approach that I explained about, what Solidaridad now is basically doing with taxpayer money, with development finance and some support from local traders and local governments, that should receive more support from the big consumer goods companies. I think recently I saw a LinkedIn post that the consumer goods forum companies, they want to be forest positive. They have this forest positive agenda now. They have a turnover of $3 trillion. So if like 1% of 1% of that would be invested in landscape initiatives to not just look at where their packaging and soy and palm oil comes from, but actually to also look at the governance and the poverty drivers of deforestation, that would really show this kind of forest positive agenda. Otherwise, they are just like, as we say in Dutch, hun eigen stoepje aan het schoonvegen, sweeping their own part of the pavement. And I know companies say, yeah, but that's where we have leverage and that's our sphere of influence. But you guys are buying these commodities, these globalized commodities at increasingly affordable prices. And part of it is that the checks and balances and the taxes that are imposed on European or North American commodities are not being imposed on whatever you get from the tropics. So I think if you want to be forest positive, invest in landscapes. And
Thanks, Jan Maarten.
not just in certification.
That's a clear call to action. Like looking at this context, what do you think about this increased palm oil free labeling? Should we even talk about that, or what?
Well, like I said in the beginning, if Europe at this critical moment kind of starts boycotting palm oil because it's evil and it's causing deforestation, it's stupid in two ways. I think one, these statistics show that plantation palm oil is not one of the main drivers of deforestation anymore. So if you want to stop deforestation, you can eat whatever you want, but by eating something that's palm oil free, is not going to help a lot. And then the second argument is we lose leverage. We have to team up with the traders. We have to team up with whomever is influential in these landscapes to make sure that the residual deforestation, the non-palm oil related deforestation, is also addressed. Because look at the figures. There's still 300,000 hectares of primary forest disappearing in Indonesia.
Yeah. Thanks. Another question from the audience. How does the Indian and Chinese demand for palm oil influence whether there will be a global demand for sustainable production of palm oil?
Well, they are major consumers, and don't forget the domestic consumption of Indonesia as well, because Indonesia is now, I mean, it doesn't show in the import-export figures, but Indonesia is now the biggest consumer of palm oil globally. Before the EU, before India, before China. But the question was about India and China. I think in India and China, palm oil is a poor man's crop or a poor women's crop. It's what you buy when you can't afford the more kind of upmarket, high market brands or oil types like mustard oil, for example, in India. So in terms of sustainability awareness of consumers, I think that will take a long time. Yes, there is a rising middle class in both India and China, and we can make them aware about their impact on the forest. But because palm oil is usually, it's bulk and it's cheap, I don't expect consumer action in China and India to be very influential. Because of the volumes, it is interesting to think about collaboration between the Indian, Chinese, Malaysian, and Indonesian governments. They are mutually dependent. China and India need the oil to keep their population fed and happy, and Malaysia and Indonesia need the revenues. So if a deal is struck there to, I say, gradually lower the floor, make sure, for example, that we start with eliminating all illegal production and illegal trade related to, for example, deforestation or the violation of local rights, that's a good step in the right direction. And if these 4 countries in Asia together come up with a code or a standard that would be mandatory for everybody, so not voluntary like our SPO, that could actually complement very much the efforts of RSPO looking at the more developed markets.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. Another question from the audience. Can I have your opinion on RSPO credits?
I'm a big fan. I'm a really big fan, and I have always been a bit pushing back on NGOs, pushing companies to move fully into segregated or identity preserved palm oil. And that's because segregated and IP is only affordable if it comes from very big plantations with their own mills, with basically controlled supply chains. And I think in the RSPO system, smallholders deserve a place. They should not be excluded from sustainable palm oil value chains just because they can't do all the traceability because there's middlemen in between. And the credits or the certificates are a way in which smallholder groups can actually earn back some of the investments they make in sustainable palm oil. It's not a really good business model if I look at the portfolio of projects in Solidaridad, because it's so tedious to bring the thousands of smallholders together in order to have a really profitable certification system. But at least the credit system allows them to be part of the sustainable palm oil community. And if more companies like these consumer goods companies commit to supporting smallholders, which currently are a bigger threat to forests than the bigger plantation groups, and pay decent premiums for the certificates, there is separate smallholder certificates. So I'm all for that. So yes, do buy certificates, but buy them from smallholders and pay them a fair price.
Okay, Jan Maarten, I see we have 10 minutes left, and in the beginning I saw a question that I think we can't overlook in these times. And I think that will be my final question from the audience. How is the COVID pandemic affecting palm oil production and trade?
Well, yes, I think there's many sides to that question. What I heard from Malaysia, for example, where the lockdown has been particularly stringent, is that a lot of trade, a lot of movement, also extension to farmers has been stopped because people were not allowed to move even outside of a 1 mile or 100-meter radius of their home. So that's quite disruptive. But on the other hand, I mean, the world needs to be fed. I think there have been massive shifts, at least here in Europe, on out-of-home consumption versus buying your groceries at the supermarkets. And these things affect the the trade chains and the position of out of home versus retail, for example. At the bottom of it, it's palm oil is a prime food commodity, and I think compared to recreation, for example, or travel, the sector has not been as affected as have many other sectors. And I know that, for example, in West Africa, even though freedom of movement is restricted in the bigger cities, the palm oil producing areas in the countryside, they operate basically business as usual. So it's a mixed. I think it's a mixed message. I think trade and value chains may be more disrupted because of changes at the consumer end than some of the producer country areas. But it depends a lot on the local lockdowns and the strictness of them.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. I realized we're kind of running through time. I can't believe how fast this is going. Is there? I want to move towards a wrap up. Is there anything you want to say to the audience before we start closing? Or final word?
Well, I think I've already been like preaching on telling people what to do and what not to do.
And sharing a lot of information. I'm happy that this webinar will be recorded so even I can listen back to it.
I think in hindsight, the community working on sustainable palm oil inside and outside of our SPO has been maybe a bit too self-centered and not paying enough attention on what was happening in terms of the reputation of palm oil and how our SPO itself has become a campaign target because it was like too little, too late, or just not enough. I think RSPO has triggered national initiatives like in Malaysia and Indonesia, and it has triggered traders to actually not just look at their own footprint, but also to look at the value chain. So there's a lot of instruments that RSPO has developed, a dispute settlement facility, compensation procedure, grievance panel, that can be applied much wider globally. And we should advocate these kind of solutions that are now being developed and tested in a, I think, economically viable way in palm oil, beyond palm oil. So be more on the offensive, show that we have done a great job by reducing the deforestation for palm oil plantations significantly, is almost a factor 10 in Indonesia over the past decade, and try to replicate this in other crops and in other regions. A palm oil boycott is not the answer. Actually, we should be buying more sustainable palm oil in order to kind of tip the balance and make sure that tropical land use is done in a more sustainable way, not only to save the rainforest, but also to avoid a climate catastrophe.
Thanks, Jan Maarten. That's useful guidance, I think, for all working on palm oil. And thank you so much for everything you have shared. I think we learned a lot. And yeah. So, and I see a response coming in. Thank you, Jan Maarten, Marieke. This was very interesting. So we are nearing the end of our time. So I also realized we had quite some unanswered questions. So what I would like to ask those who had their question unanswered is take it from the chat, send it to me and CC Jan Maarten, and we'll try to answer them as much as possible. And then I would say thanks everybody so much for joining. This was the first SPOC webinar, but it's a series, so we'll have a next one coming up. And Owen will show the slide now. The next webinar is on 26th October, so in a month from now. And it will be with a real expert on the topic. Her name is Arti, full name Maharti Rihana, from Satelligence in Indonesia. Satelligence is a satellite organization, a satellite monitoring organization. And I think we will use that opportunity to dig deeper on, let's say, what is happening on the ground in Indonesia, what are further drivers, and learn more about that. And I also realized that there were quite some questions today about that. So I'm still sure we can learn more. We will also send everybody an evaluation form so we can learn what we can do better next time with this webinar. And for now, I would like to thank you all for listening and your active contributions and sending the webinars. Comments are welcome on the SPOC LinkedIn as well. Suggestions, and also if you really liked it, and if you liked it, please also feel free to share the recordings. We would really appreciate that, because we think this will help to further broaden the conversation and broaden the discussion around palm oil, and also, let's say, make sure that we do, as Europe, take our responsibility along the lines that Jan Maarten has suggested, I think. More information about SPOC can also be found on the SPOC website. There's information about palm oil. So here with this, I'm going to close this webinar. I love keeping on time, and thank you all very much, and thanks again, Jan Maarten, and bye-bye for now.
Thanks for the opportunity, Marika. Bye-bye.